Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Revolutionary Mothers. A quick show of today's shirt, Chug a Beer for Paul Revere, as we will be talking about Paul Revere's partner, William Dawes. I wanted to start with an explanation of today's flag. This is the Grand Union flag. It was actually the first national flag of the United States, created during the first year of the Revolutionary War. It's also known by several other names, including the Continental Colors, the Congress flag, as this is the first flag that Congress met under. This is also known as the first Navy ensign flag, which was flown in December of 1775 on the USS Alfred. And last but not least, it is also known as the Cambridge flag, as this was raised in camp in Cambridge, just outside of Boston, on January 1st, 1776. So today we're going to talk about several individuals. We're going to start with Dicey Langston. Dicey's actual name is Laodicea Langston, but her friends called her Dicey because I'm sure they messed up her name as much as I just did. She is the daughter of Solomon and Sarah Bennett Langston of the Lawrence District of South Carolina. She was born May 14th of 1766 on her father's plantation. Dicey's mother died when she was young, and she was raised by her fathers and her brothers. When the war began, her brothers enlisted in the Continental Army. They camped in the woods with a small band of patriots so that their plantation would not be attacked. To save the family from any difficulties, they visited in secret, visited the plantation, that is. Through it all, they managed to maintain communication with Dicey, who became an outspoken patriot. By her 15th birthday in 1781, Dicey is an expert horsewoman and an excellent shot. While doing her everyday chores, she noticed that the British had set up a camp near her father's farm, and she made note of their various activities. She passed the information on to her brother's camp, which was on the other side of the Enoree River, about 20 miles away. Dicey's father was also a patriot. Although his active role was limited by his age and various illnesses, he was generous, with his resources and influence. Many of Dicey's neighbors in the Lawrence District of South Carolina were Tories, some of whom were relatives, which of course makes that a very difficult situation. But on the other side, it made it very easy for Dicey to gather information on the British. Tories began to question how so much information was getting to the rebels and suspected Solomon Langston and Dicey. They threatened her father, saying that he would be held accountable for Dicey's actions if any more information leaked to the Patriots. Solomon, the father, scolds her and forbids her from visiting her brother's camp in the future. She reluctantly agrees, and for a while she stops reporting info to her brothers in their camp. The Bloody Scouts were a band of Tory outlaws led by Bloody Bill Cunningham, and they were known for their cruelty to families who sympathized with the rebels. When Dicey learned that they were planning to raid Little Eden, where her brother James and his peers were camping, she knew that she had to warn them, regardless of her father's orders. She also knew that she would be killed if she was captured. She starts out on foot late one night after the family and servants are asleep. She avoids the roads to be detected and goes through various fields and forests. Making her way through the fields, through marshes, through creeks, she reaches the icy waters of the Enoree River, which was swollen with spring rains. She gets to the center of the stream where the current is so strong and the water is up to her shoulders. She falls and the swift current carries her downstream, basically spinning her as she is going downstream. She regains her footing but has no idea as far as sense of direction is concerned. She struggles towards the bank, but she's not certain if it's the right side of the river. She fell again, regains her footing, and then falls again. So she's really struggling here. However, she was able to get herself to the bank where she catches her breath and she's soaked to the bone, and she waits until she has a little bit more strength to carry on. She continues and eventually finds the right path to her brother's camp. After a great distance, she reaches the camp and warns her brothers of the Bloody Scout's intentions. Her brothers had just returned from an expedition. They're hungry. They're exhausted. Dicey has them build a fire while she quickly mixes up some cornbread. Dicey returns home in time to cook breakfast for her father, who has no idea what has happened. It was weeks before anybody learned of her 20-mile-long journey through the middle of the night. Later that morning, the Bloody Scouts discover. What happens then is that the Bloody Scouts start asking questions. How did they know we were coming? As are other Tories in the Lawrence district. Although they couldn't pin it on the Langston family, they warned them and they said, if we find out it is you, we are coming after you. The Bloody Scouts then decide that Dicey's father, Solomon, must die. They go to his house. Of course, Solomon is old, he is sick, he's infirmed, he can't move. So, Dicey, well, first, her father denies that he has anything to do with this. The leader of the Bloody Scouts calls Dicey's father a liar and points his pistol at Solomon's chest. Dicey jumps up and gets between the pistol and her father. The angry Bloody Scout says, get out of the way or I will put a bullet through your heart. She actually gets closer to her father, says that he is an old man and that he should not be shot. Another of the Bloody Scouts actually takes pity and says to his peer, you cannot shoot Dicey, this young lady, or her father. At another time during the war, Dicey was on her way home riding from a neighboring settlement in the Spartanburg district when she is met by a company of loyalists. They demand that they tell her, or that they demand that she tell them what was happening amongst the patriot groups. She claims to know nothing. The leader had been an outlaw before the conflict, but the British had given him their protection for taking arms up against the rebels. He draws his pistol as he says to Dicey, I will shoot you if you do not talk. She says, I have nothing to share. The captain of the band holds a pistol to Dicey's breast and again threatens her. Dicey again refuses. Incensed by her defiance, the officer is about to shoot when another officer hits the pistol, causing it to go up in the air and the shot to be fired in the air. As the Bloody Scouts are squabbling, Dicey hops on a horse and makes a speedy escape. I'm sure there's a little bit of legend in this story. However, after the war, Dicey marries Thomas Springfield, who is a local patriot leader. They had a large family. Dicey boasts that she gives birth to 32 sons who were then able to fight for liberty. I think that's a bit of a legend as well. She dies on May 23rd, 1837 in Greenville County, South Carolina, and is buried in the family cemetery behind the family cabin. If there are any questions throughout the presentation. Please type them in and I will be happy to answer, or a discussion point. I'm happy to share and discuss. Otherwise, I'll just keep going here. Next up is William Dawes. William Dawes was a tanner and a patriot who lived in Boston. He is one of the riders who makes the famous ride the night before Lexington and Concord on April 18th of 1775. He is actually sent by Dr. Joseph Warren, who we had discussed earlier, to alert John Hancock and Sam Adams that the British were coming after them. He was born in Boston on April 6, 1745, and is the second of 12 children. On October 28, 1767, Dawes is one of 650 Boston citizens who signs a non-importation agreement against the British. Remember, at this time, it's right after the Stamp Act, which ultimately is repealed, but you have the Townshend Acts and the Intolerable Acts. To further support the cause, the Boston Gazette states that Dawes wore a suit made entirely in the United States on his wedding day. In April of 1768, Dawes joins the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company, which is a private training organization for militia officers, and he is also promoted to second major of the regiment of the Boston Militia. Dawes was also a member of the Sons of Liberty, who we discussed earlier, and he is a Freemason. A Freemason, that is a society that is big in colonial America. They, as well as Europe. The founding fathers, amongst the founding fathers, there is a high percentage of Freemasons. October of 1774, Dawes plans and leads a daring break-in at the gun house on Boston Common. While the guards were at roll call, Dawes and several members of his artillery company steal 2 cannons. They sneak them out the back window of the gun house and hide them in a large box under the desk in a nearby school. The cannons remained hidden for 2 weeks until Dawes has them removed one night in a wheelbarrow and hides them under a pile of coal in a blacksmith shop. Those 2 cannons are used throughout the Revolutionary War. Dr. Joseph Warren sends Dawes and Revere on their famous ride. Remember, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. Revere and Dawes take different routes. Revere crosses the Charles River by boat and rode through through Somerville, Medford, Arlington, and Lexington. Dawes actually travels a longer distance than Revere does, going south across Boston Neck to Roxbury, then west and north through Brookline, Brighton, Cambridge, and Lexington. He covers 17 miles in 2 hours. Dawes' route also required passing through a guarded gate at Boston Neck, which was on high alert at the time. Unlike Revere, Dawes does not stop to alert colonial Minutemen, riding straight on to Lexington. There is debate as to why he did this, not alerting Minutemen, but it is possible that he believed his mission from Warren was only to warn Hancock and Adams of the British approaching. As a result, the militia took longer to respond to the British approach on Dawes' route than it does on Revere's route. Dawes finally meets up with Revere at the Hancock-Clark House in Lexington, where Hancock and Adams are staying. He meets up with Revere at about 12:30 in the morning on the 19th of April. After warning them, Revere and Dawes get on their horses and set off for Concord. running into Dr. Samuel Prescott along the way. Prescott decides to join them on their trip, and at about 3 in the morning, the three riders are encountered by British redcoats. According to Revere, Dawes and Prescott manage to get away. Revere is captured. Dawes tries to outrun the British patrol, but knowing that his horse was too tired, he scares off two of the soldiers chasing him by riding up to a nearby farmhouse and shouting, "Hey boys, I've got two of them." Of course, the British soldiers think that they're riding into an ambush and they take off. Dawes actually stops his horse so suddenly that he is bucked off of the horse, and then his whereabouts for the rest of the night are largely unknown. Dawes later joins the Continental Army at Cambridge and fights at the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775. He moves his family to Worcester, Mass. during the siege of Boston, where he is later appointed commissary. Dawes, quite frankly, has been largely forgotten and completely overshadowed by Revere. Revere actually wrote a personal account of his ride, which was then widely circulated. Dawes did not. The publication of The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere in 1861 by Longfellow also helps to cement Revere's reputation and the legend. In 1861, when the poem is published, Dawes and Prescott are not included in it whatsoever. Dawes dies on February 25th, 1799, and true to form, as he has been forgotten by history, nobody knows the location of his grave. We are now going to talk about Behethland Moore. She was born on Christmas Eve, 1764, in Fauquier County, Virginia. Again, I'm sure I'm butchering that name. Her father, Captain Frank Moore, commanded one of the Virginia regiments at Braddock's defeat during the French and Indian War. Her mother is Frances Foote. In about 1768, her parents moved to South Carolina and settled on Little River, also in the Lawrence district, where Captain Moore, her father, dies in 1770. Mrs. Moore then marries Captain Samuel Savage, who in 1774 moves to a plantation just above what was then known as Saluda Old Town. Here, Miss Moore, Behethland, and her two brothers, William and George, live with their mother and their stepfather. During the war, on one occasion, a band of Tories come to the house of Captain Savage, and they take away a Negro boy who had been a personal attendant of Moore's father in the Indian Wars. With no thought of risk to herself, Behethland goes after them to rescue the Negro boy. The men were also looking to steal horses. One horse, which proved to be very stubborn, they ordered the black servant to catch it for them, and when, at Moore's direction, he refuses, the Tory says that he will beat the servant for disobeying. Moore throws herself between the Negro servant and the Tory, and then the Tory steps back. During the war, it became necessary for intelligence to be shared with Captain Wallace, who was in command of a small force on the other side of the Saluda River just above Moore's home. No male messenger could be found. Think about it. They're all away fighting the war. But Moore, who was 15, volunteers. Accompanied by her younger brother and a friend named Fanny Smith, she goes up the river in a canoe in the middle of the night, gave warning to Captain Wallace, and through him to Colonel Henry Lighthorse Lee. An attack by the British is averted because of this information. The next morning, a young American officer who had been below this point on a recon mission rode up to the house to make inquiries. These were answered by Behethland. This was also, and this sounds like a Hollywood ending, Behethland ends up marrying this soldier in 1784. The soldier's name is Captain William Butler. General Butler was almost constantly engaged in public service and is away from home a great part of the time. He serves in Congress from 1801 to 1814 and then commands forces in Charleston, South Carolina as Major General from 1814 to 1815. The support of the family depended mainly upon the produce of Moore's small farm. She was able to produce enough to keep her family together, keep them fed, keep them healthy. She also oversees the family's education while her husband is away. She dies in 1853. We're now going to talk about Prudence Wright. Again, if there are any questions, please type them in and I will be happy to answer them. Prudence Wright was born in November of 1740 in Dunstable, Massachusetts. She marries David Wright of Pepperell, Massachusetts in 1761, and that's where the family settles. During the next 14 years, Prudence helps her husband, cares for the children, cares for the farm, and she actually becomes a leader among the young matrons of the town. Pepperell was a hotbed of patriot activity. There was not a Tory within its borders. When women of Pepperell heard about the Boston Tea Party, they burned their tea in front of the Pepperell Meeting House. All of Pepperell's able-bodied men are enrolled in the militia. Remember, there's no true Continental Army at the time. It's really composed primarily of state militias. The men are ready at the first call, hence the Minutemen label. Massachusetts was unique in having Minutemen that were part of a network of committees and signals, messengers, and volunteer soldiers that towns used to communicate after the British occupied Boston, closing town meetings. So this is how they met and shared ideas and plans and the such. Women in Pepperell molded cartridges or molded bullets and tied cartridges around them. They filled powder horns. They sent their men off to fight and faced new duties at home, which we have talked about with other women from previous episodes. It was different, or it was difficult, I should say, for Prudence to realize that two of her brothers were actually fighting on the other side with the British. When word came that the British were on their way, towns near Boston armed to meet them. At about 9 a.m. on April 19th, 1775, which is when Lexington and Concord take place, a messenger arrives in Pepperell with news of the fighting at Lexington and the advance of the British towards Concord. The colonel of the local militia rides out, leaving orders for the Pepperell men to meet him at Groton. So well prepared were the Pepperell Minutemen that they actually arrived at Groton, 5 miles away, before the company there was ready to fight. While visiting her mother in Hollis, Prudence overhears Samuel and Leonard Whiting making plans to pass messages between the British to the north and those in Boston. In short time, she hoofs it back, via horse of course, to Pepperell and sends an alert out to the matrons of the town. Word is sent from house to house for women to meet at Jewett's Bridge over the Nashua River, which is between Pepperell and Groton, where a person coming from the north would have to cross. All in all, about 40 women gathered. With rumors, and this is really the fog of war, with rumors circulating in April of 1775, it's difficult to appreciate or understand. Quite frankly, think of the rumors and such that we're all hearing now with regards to our current situation. The uncertainty that results from different reports back in April of 1775 of horsemen who gathered information as they rode. These stories and rumors are making their way from town to town. It's this uncertainty that led women to disguise themselves as men, wearing the clothing of their absent husbands and fathers who have gone off to fight. They have, as far as weaponry, they have old muskets, pitchforks, tools, whatever they can get their hands on, because again, their husbands and fathers, having gone off to fight, have taken the prime instruments of war. The women of Pepperell elect Prudence as commander of their company, and they called themselves Minute Women. Prudence chooses Sarah Hartwell Shattuck of Groton as her lieutenant. Prudence hopes that if a large body of the British do appear, the women would scare them off before the British realize that this is a band of women as opposed to colonial soldiers. Pardon me. The company of women come to be known as the Prudence Wright Guard. They guarded the bridge and patrolled the road. There are pine trees on one side of the river near the bridge, but there were no houses. The road actually curved around high land on the north side. Remember, somebody coming from the north would be seen by those congregated on the bridge. So the bridge was not visible to a person coming from the north until they actually reached the bridge. But if you're on the bridge, you could see somebody coming from the north. The Minute Women waited at the bridge into the night, shielding their lantern and remaining silent. Two horsemen approached the bridge from the north. Taking advantage of the element of surprise, Prudence bursts upon them with her lantern shining in their face, demanding to know who they are and what they're doing here. The men tried to get away on horseback, but the women surrounded them and take their horses. Captain Leonard Whiting, a known Tory, draws his revolver and is about to use it when the other rider, Prudence's brother, Samuel Cummings, makes him lower it, saying, quote, "I recognize Prue's voice, and she would wade through blood for the rebel cause," unquote. The men dismount and they are searched. Dispatches from British forces to the field general in Boston are found. The women march them to a house and hold them as prisoners, a house in the neighborhood. In the morning, the prisoners are marched to Groton and delivered to the Committee of Safety. The papers found on the men are sent to Charlestown, which is just outside Boston. The next day, the two men are given their liberty on the condition that they would leave the colony. They depart in the direction of New York, and Samuel Cummings never returns. Samuel was Prudence's favorite brother. Afterward, the Prudence Wright Guard disbands. The Guard's husbands return from fighting at Lexington and Concord, and they repeat the words of Captain Parker on Lexington Green, quote, "Don't fire unless you are fired on. But if they want war, let it begin here," unquote. The women tell how they guarded the bridge, and after doing work at home, they return to camp. In March of 1776, Leonard and Benjamin Whiting, Thomas and Samuel Cummings were summoned to appear before the committees of safety. The complaint that was lodged against them was disproven or unproven, and they were discharged. In June, Thomas Cummings was indicted before the Supreme Court of Massachusetts and was given bail for his appearance in September. Leonard Whiting is put in jail at Amherst on the charge of, quote, being inimical to the rights and liberties of the United Colonies, unquote. He took no active part in the war after the Declaration of Independence. It was judged that his treason came from a soldier's loyalty to the government. He went to Vermont, where he spent the remainder of his life. Okay, moving along. We're now going to talk about Betsy Ross. Of course, Betsy Ross is known for making the first United States flag. The story is told that she made the flag after a visit in June of 1776 by General Washington, by Robert Morris, and her husband's uncle, George Ross. She demonstrated, allegedly, how to cut a 5-pointed star with a single clip of the scissors if the fabric were folded correctly. The story was not told until 1870 by Betsy's grandson, and he even claimed at the time that there was no way to confirm the story. Most historians agree that it was not Betsy who made the first flag, though she was a flag maker who was paid in 1777 by the Pennsylvania State Navy Board for making the ship's colors. She was born Elizabeth Griscom in Philadelphia. She was the great-granddaughter of a carpenter, Andrew Griscom, who had arrived in New Jersey in 1680 from Great Britain. She had attended Quaker schools and learned needlework. When she married John Ross, who was an Anglican, in 1773, she was expelled from the Quaker meeting house for marrying outside of the sect. She eventually joins the Free Quakers, or they were also known as the quote-unquote Fighting Quakers, because they did not adhere to pacifism as strictly as the Quaker sect. John and Betsy Ross began an upholstery business together. John is killed in January of 1776 on militia duty when gunpowder explodes at the Philadelphia waterfront. Betsy acquired property and kept up the upholstery business that they created together, beginning to make flags for Pennsylvania as well. In 1777, Betsy marries Joseph Ashburn, a sailor who had the misfortune of being on a ship captured by the British in 1781. He dies in prison in 1782. A quick note, during the Revolutionary War, as the colonies are putting together a navy, they very much use privateers, who are basically mercenaries paid to carry goods to, be involved in the war. If the British captured a privateer, they would either imprison those that they captured or impress them to serve in the British Navy. So again, a quick note on that. In 1783, after her second husband has died, Betsy marries again. Her husband was John Claypool, who had been in prison with Betsy's second husband, Joseph Ashburn. Claypool dies in 1817 after a long disability. Betsy lives until 1836, dying on January 30th. She was reburied in the Free Quaker burying ground in 1857. When Betsy's grandson tells the story of her involvement with the first flag, it quickly becomes legend. It was first published in Harper's Monthly in 1873, and by the mid-1880s, the story is included in many school textbooks. Changes in women's lives and social recognition of those changes made discovering a founding mother, quote unquote, to stand along founding fathers, quote unquote, attractive to the U.S. imagination. Not to say that Betsy was not involved in some way, shape, or form. Betsy Ross was a widow making her own way in life with a young child. She was widowed twice patriotically during the war. Increased patriotic fervor connected with the U.S. flag required a tale that was more than just a business transaction. Also, the increase or the advertising industry, as it grows, made the woman, Betsy, with a flag popular. It was used to sell a host of products. Betsy Ross became a prominent character in the telling of the story of the U.S. founding, while many others, unfortunately, have been forgotten because they did not have what's the word I want? Their story didn't have the sizzle of a Betsy Ross. We have a few more minutes left, so we're going to talk about a couple other folks. Next up is James Otis. Again, if there are any questions, please type it in and ask. James Otis is a political activist during the period leading up to the Revolution. He is tied in with the Sons of Liberty and all the major players in New England. He actually helps to formulate the colonists' grievances legally against the British government in the 1760s. He graduates from Harvard College in 1743 and is admitted to the bar in 1748. He moves his law practice from Plymouth to Boston in 1750. His reputation was built mainly upon his famous challenge in 1761 to British-imposed writs of assistance. Arguing before the Supreme Court in Boston, Otis raises the doctrine of natural law underlying the rights of citizens and argued that writs of assistance, even if authorized by Parliament, were null and void. In harking back to fundamental British constitutional law, which ironically enough is what our system of government and constitution are based on, Otis offered the colonists a basic doctrine upon which they would draw from for decades to come. He is given credit for coining the phrase, taxation without representation is tyranny. Otis was elected, in May of 1761 to the General Court, which was the provincial legislature of Massachusetts, and was re-elected each year thereafter during his life. In 1766, he is chosen as Speaker of the House, though his choice was negated by the royal governor of the province. Who's the royal governor from earlier conversations that we've had, earlier episodes? It's Thomas Hutchinson. In September of 1762, Otis publishes, quote, a vindication of the conduct of the House of Representatives of the province of Massachusetts Bay, catchy title, unquote, in defense of that body's rebuke of the governor for asking the assembly to pay for ships not authorized by them, those sent to protect New England fisheries against French privateers. Otis also wrote various articles and state papers that were addressed to the colonies to enlist them in the common cause, and sent such papers to the government in Great Britain to uphold the rights or set forth the grievances of the colonists. Remember, when the revolution or when revolutionary fervor first starts, many of the colonists see this as a war for New England or a war in New England. So those, as you go further south in the colonies, to New York, to Pennsylvania, to Maryland, to Virginia, they're saying, why should we be involved in this war? And this is where Otis starts to plant that seed. Few of the colonists were so frequently quoted, denounced, or applauded in Parliament and the British press before 1769 as much as Otis was. In 1765, he is a delegate to the Stamp Act Congress in New York City. He serves on the committee that prepares the address sent to the House of Commons, which ultimately leads to the Stamp Act being repealed. Otis was struck on the head during an altercation with a Crown officer in 1769 and basically becomes insane until his death. He dies in 1783 after being struck by lightning. The last person that we will talk about today is Patience Wright. She was born on Long Island. She and her family later moved to Bordentown, New Jersey, where she marries a Quaker farmer. Her husband dies in 1769. While she was able to stay in the home, she wasn't able to inherit any of his property. So she begins to sculpt in wax to support herself. Wright and her sister Rachel, who had also been widowed, opened up a waxworks in both Manhattan and Philadelphia. After meeting Jane Meekum, who is the sister of Benjamin Franklin, Patience travels to London, where she quickly wins over London high society with her artistic skills. She actually meets King George and Queen Charlotte. Wright began gathering sensitive information during her London sculpting sessions, and she sends it back to the United States, or to the colonies, I should say, encased in her wax sculptures. She also took the colony's case directly to the King and Queen, finding a supporter in William Pitt, for whom Pittsburgh is named. Wright was vocally supportive of the colonies. Once open warfare breaks out, the higher-ups of London society begin distancing themselves from her, and she eventually makes her way to Paris. Who is in Paris during the Revolutionary War? Ben Franklin, John Adams. So she's traveling in those circles once again. She returns to London after the war on her way home to the United States. Unfortunately, she dies in London after taking a nasty fall. This is where we will end today. Again, any questions, please leave them here on this posting and I will gladly answer them. Thank you all for joining. I will see you tomorrow at noon for episode number 6 of Revolutionary Mothers and Fathers, where we will start by talking about Benedict Arnold. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good day.